Welcome to This Week in Local, a locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin. I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Boland. Mike?
Hi, Charlie.
So This Week in Local is Locology's weekly podcast where we talk about all things local. Mike and I are going to take a quick look back at 2022 in this episode. Mike, why don't you start us off with just a couple of things this year that stood out for you?
Yeah, so sort of the headline of this year was what I call Metaverse Mania. And we haven't seen a topic this overhyped in a really long time. I actually made the prediction last year at this time that this would really die down in 2022, and I was dead wrong. It actually gained steam. And the reason why I thought that was going to happen, and I'll circle back to that because I think I'm going to sort of double down on that prediction right, at this point. Mm-hmm. But the reason I thought that at the time was that we're so far away from this thing materializing that, people have low attention spans. They're going to get bored and move on when there's not the immediate gratification of this thing we're calling the metaverse actually showing up. And I'll pause really quick to define that. We have metaverse-like experiences, or metaverse-like fiefdoms is what I like to say, which are things like Fortnite or Roblox or Decentraland, which are these sort of 3D game-like experiences where you sort of run around, interact with people, and do things. The actual metaverse in its sort of true form, when it eventually arrives someday, which I think is like years or decades away, is just like the web. It's interoperable. It's not all these silos. It's interoperable. It's just like the web. It has common standards and languages, HTTPS and protocols. And so you can essentially have an interoperable experience where you bounce around from one experience to another while your avatar or whatever sort of 3D form you take is persistent as you move around, sort of like the web today, where you can just bounce around wherever you want. It's not all sort of siloed. So anyway, that metaverse is so far away that I was actually surprised that it's just like headlines everywhere, every press release, every headline, everyone just shoves in the word metaverse. And I guess it's sort of that herd mentality. So I guess I'm not too surprised. But anyway, I'm sort of doubling down this year and saying that in 23, it will indeed sort of scale back. And I think that all those reasons I mentioned, the immediate gratification, it's those reasons, but then another big compelling reason, which is that we're in an economic downturn. And I think that these are periods where sort of some of the frivolous future gazing sort of goes away and everyone needs to sort of go heads down into things that are producing revenue today. So I think a lot of that daydreaming about the metaverse is going to become passé in a more economically constrained environment. Now, that's not to say that actual vision, that eventual vision that I think is legitimate, has lots of promise and potential for our connected future. I don't think that will necessarily go away in terms of people working on it, right? Like Meta, the company Meta is going to, keep trudging along. They're going to keep building towards it, keep trying to build it. But you're going to see less headlines in USA Today, right, about this metaverse thing as you currently do. So I think that part, the hype part, is going to sort of scale back a little bit. Now, I have a lot more to say in terms of like the definitions, the metaverse. I think I actually see two tracks there. One is the one I mentioned, the more popular connotation of these sort of online embodied 3D sort of game-like experiences that you sort of run around in. But then there's like a real world metaverse, which is adding digital depth to the actual world around us with geo-anchored data that sort of evokes graphics through AR interface, like on a storefront or a statue in the park. And that was actually the topic of our Place conference this year. We called it the real world metaverse. I think that version of the metaverse has a lot more value and a lot more sort of realistic near-term outcomes. We're already seeing that. Last week, we talked about visual search on this show, and that's sort of a form of that vision. But I guess I'll pause there. But those are the two tracks. And that first one that is just so like hype-ridden, my prediction is that will sort of recede a bit in 2023.
There was a lot of hype and a lot of chatter around metaverse, and a lot of people pretending to talk about it and not really understanding it. I didn't write much about the metaverse. What I did write this year about it was mostly about sort of food in the metaverse, and when McDonald's was like scooping up metaverse patents, and
Wendy's was big on it.
And then it turned out that actually quick serve restaurants are an early adopter of dining in the metaverse.
Now, what that means is it's not actually like you're eating some
No, it's like you're playing a game and you order Uber Eats to deliver McDonald's
Yeah.
to you during the game experience.
Well, it's a combination of
Yeah, that's
things.
kind of one use case that I wrote about. I'm sure there
Yeah.
are quite a few others.
Yeah. Now that's actually interesting. So we had at the Place conference I mentioned a gentleman from Meta talk about the Wendyverse. So Wendy's did a lot of cool things
Right.
in Meta Horizons, which is their sort of version of the
Mhm.
metaverse. And one thing that sort of came out of that, which was interesting, is that and it's another signal that we're just overhyping the hell out of this thing. It really is just an additional channel. Like if you do something in Horizon Worlds or a brand activation in like Roblox or in Decentraland or in Fortnite, really all it is another piece of your media mix, another incremental channel, in some cases to reach an incremental user base, like Roblox, for example. It's, tweens and Gen Z, Gen Y. No, Gen Z. So essentially it's not as like glorified as we're all making it out to be. It's really just another channel. It's having, brand activations to get in brand engagement. It could be actually ordering a hamburger in the real world, or it could just be, the same reason that you do display advertising.
There's a lot of branding.
Home.
I think a lot of it's branding versus transactions at this point.
And it does have deeper levels of engagement. Like if you're playing a game and you're more involved and you're just sort of like interacting with the brand in sort of a game environment, that's a deeper interaction that leads to things like brand recall and all those KPIs, as opposed to seeing a billboard or a banner ad on your phone. So I think it's just, the things that they've done so far, brands have done so far in the metaverse, is really sort of not this glorified new thing. It's really just a simple, incremental channel in your media mix.
But I think the reason QSRs took to it soon is because I think there was that transactional use case within the gaming environment. And there's also, a loyalty rewards angle to it as well.
And it makes sense. You're sitting there, you're gaming all day, you get hungry, you work up a hunger, and you don't have to leave the game, and you can, the next thing you know, the doorbell rings.
We could talk all day about the metaverse and pretend we know everything about it. You know a lot more about it than I do. I do wonder if you think, because metaverse and Web3 were they're not synonymous, but they're often spoken of in the same sentence during this year. Do you think there'll be a divergence or a convergence of those two topics in 23?
I think they'll converge because they're very inextricably linked. When we talk about the metaverse, that's sort of the front end. That's the experience. Web3 involves a number of different components. One aspect of Web3 is some of these sort of payment rails and payment systems that are more decentralized. It also has a lot to do with the ability to for content creators to make money directly. Web3 is all about decentralization. Web2, of course, was about everyone having a voice, but that voice happening on Facebook or on Yelp or on Google and all these places where we became the content. So Web3, which I think is a little bit too utopian for my interest, which in terms of its realistic deployment, is that, those networks go away and instead we just sort of like peer-to-peer monetization.
Right.
And I think that the problem with that argument is, again, it's just sort of like kumbaya and too sort of utopian. When you lose the network, you lose the network effect. You lose the ability to aggregate an audience, which is, so I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And of course it's like, wishful thinking and it's great and people should keep working on it. There's so many parts of it, but like the blockchain and smart contracts and to some degree crypto, even though that's having some bad sort of ups and downs, but like some of the blockchain stuff and smart contracts, and there are aspects that will be plucked out, like anything else. It's going to be a pendulum. It's going to be overhyped. There'll be a shakeout, but the good parts about it are going to be cherry picked and are going to be very influential in our sort of connected future. So some version of that, all that is going to live on.
I believe so, and I think anything that sort of unlocks the creator economy and allows it to monetize more effectively. There's a lot of impetus behind that.
It needs to be done realistically, or it's just doing itself a disservice.
Right. And I think there's a lot of wishful thinking or wish casting, whatever term you want to use, of people who wanted to see the big platforms fall and wanted Web3 to be the instrument of their destruction.
The classic Schadenfreude cycle.
That was ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
We may get there, but didn't happen this year. And it may move further in 23, but who knows what the timeline is there. I'm not going to predict that. But I think what was interesting is kind of seeing just how, consumer payments kind of are revolutionized, and then as soon as they're revolutionized, they become quite controversial because they seem to always go back to reinforcing um, the bad parts of human nature, like immediate gratification and things like that. So I think there's this sort of revolution followed by realization that you're sort of enabling your human instincts to follow down paths that are often self-destructive, and then the inevitable regulation that follows that to try to clean up the mess, right? So I think we saw that happen quite a bit this year. The term unicorn became so banal during the course of 2022. And there's lots of reasons for that. But I think anyone now who says unicorn with a straight face needs to put some coins in a jar to save for a gift for one of their kids or their nephew or niece or nephew or something, because it's become just such a cringy cliche, right? Everyone's a unicorn. I mean, I'm not a unicorn, but I may as well be, right? So, and I don't know if you had the same observation, Mike, that good God, if we just stop calling things unicorn, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And how we got there, how that became so silly.
Yeah, and an additional level of distaste around that term, not just because it became overused and cliche, but because, the market downturns that caused the whole sort of valuation metrics that led to those runaway unicorns. Looking back at that, it's just sort of like it's an irrelevant term because it refers to the metrics of a time that has passed.
Right. Well, unicorn was the shorthand, or one of the signposts of the cheap money era that we've exited, to many's chagrin, to some people's relief. But that's what's leading us into 2023.
Well, you could argue that it's more relevant now because the reason it became irrelevant. So initially it meant a valuation of over $1 billion. Yeah. Now valuations got so out of control that they became a dime a dozen. Then it was no longer a special term. Now a lot of those valuations have come back down to earth. So there are probably fewer unicorns. So ironically, it may be more relevant now.
It's become a little harder to become one. I think it's quite difficult now to, times like these always lead to great startups, right? There's a long history of that. And I think 2023 will be a year that many great companies will be created. We don't know what they are or in what space. I think we can guess. A lot of them will be something to do with AI and something to do with Metaverse or whatever it is. You could probably name 5 other categories that will likely be concentrated. Startups will be concentrated around a handful of categories. They'll emerge next year, like we all know what kind of came out of 2005 through 7, right? A lot of great companies. Anyway, so we'll probably looking at that in the next couple of years as like another golden age of startups that will become unicorns. I think we'll probably raise the bar on what defines a unicorn or call it something else, but there'll be some version of that in the future. But for now, that's become a somewhat meaningless designation.
But that cycle you reference is real. And I've always sort of wondered why. And there's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of talent available. Cheap talent. You get, talented executives that go out and start. It's like the mafias you see.
You get booted out of a company with 100,000 engineers. With a nice package often, or stocks or whatever it is. So you have some capital leave on the exit, and then you need to find something to do because you're only 30 years old or whatever it is.
So it's the talent plus it's sort of like the perspective of a downturn and the need to, run a tight ship, which tends to breed good early habits in terms of operationally efficient companies. So there's tons of reasons once you start thinking about it, but it's a really cool cycle and it's sort of a silver lining that we see in these downturns.
So I'm going to share one more thing with the quick commerce space. And it just pretty much blew up, It still exists, don't get me wrong. But we wrote about companies like GoPuff and Gorillas and all these companies basically competing. Remember the movie There's Something About Mary, where he picks up the hitchhiker, is talking about, there's that 7-minute ab. So my great idea is 5-minute abs. And so, or whatever it was, something along those lines. Quick commerce was sort of a startup, a gig economy version of that race to the shortest delivery time, right? So you had to build more micro warehouses of smaller scale and shorter distance from the endpoint, right? So it just became this kind of silly cash ingesting race to the bottom. And I thought it was emblematic of cheap money chasing stupid ideas and attracting more people to launch Me Too versions of that stupid idea. And it still exists, but it's in grave danger. And I think we've seen a lot of, consolidation of companies whose valuations have been slashed and companies closing warehouses left and right and lots of layoffs in that space. It's in a lot of trouble. But I think it was very emblematic of some of the worst aspects of sort of the era that we're exiting now. And I thought it was a very interesting thing to watch in 2022. And I think what we'll read about in 2023, I don't know, but it'll be, a few players figuring out how to bring some rationality to that business.
Yeah, I think there's a common thread here too, which is that often when things are too good to be true, they aren't true. And that's true of the metaverse hype, what you're talking about now. I think another important lesson of what you're talking about now is just that unstoppable sort of race to the bottom pressure that even when you're in it, it's just like you're sort of drawn into that tractor beam. Yeah. And we see that a lot too.
Okay, Mike, I'm sure we could go on all day about things we think we'll be writing about in 23. That really wasn't the point here. It's kind of what stuck with us from this year. So I think we'll just end it there. And we'll wish everyone, I'm not sure when they're going to be listening to this exactly, but wish everyone a happy new year, happy, healthy, and prosperous new year.
You could say happy new year into like February.
Pretty much.
It's really
start every meeting until about March with happy new year. If it's somebody you haven't talked to yet in the new year.
Yeah.
All right then, Mike. Happy new year to you and to everyone out there.
Likewise. Thanks, Charlie.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.